Hello, welcome to the Black Ponder. I'm Neil Trotter. Let's get back to some fundamentals of philosophy. Today we're going to be talking about a branch of philosophy known as metaphysics. And we're specifically talking about the very first work of that branch, the guy that started metaphysics himself, Aristotle. And he started it with his body of work known as the Metaphysics. Now, what is the philosophical branch known as metaphysics? Well, to be direct, it is the study of the fundamental nature of being. I always use a book as an example because I just happen to be holding that in my hand. We look at the book, right? It's an object. But what really is this? We see it as paper with ink, letters and such on it, the picture on it. But what really is this? You know, we can say it's matter. And when you look at matter closely, you notice that it's a collection of particles. But what really is it? Two fundamental questions are asked in the study of metaphysics. What is actually out there? So what this book actually is, and what is it like? So if we know what it is, what is that like? That's what we're talking about when we talk about metaphysics, right? It's very fundamental, and it can get really deep depending on how far you go. The thing is, the reason why Aristotle called this work the Metaphysics is simply because he has another collection of work called the Physics. And this is simply a continuation of that work, right? It's a follow-up. Meta in Greek is kind of like after or upon, that's what it means. So it's basically the physics part 2, pretty much. That's what this is. That's what he meant when he called it that. But it kind of stuck, the name, and other philosophers use that name to describe the category or the philosophical branch that deals with the fundamental nature of being. I'm going to bring us to a quote that I found very interesting. Listen to this. There are two ways in which an X fails to be something by itself. One by addition, the other by omission. The one X adds the very term to be defined to something else, as if in defining what it is to be white. We were to add white to man and then define the combination of the two. The other X merely adds something else as an attribute, instead of defining what it is to be X, as if X meant white man. And one were to define X as white. A white man is white, to be sure, but what it means to be X is not what it means to be white. Is what it means to be X a genuine what? No, for the what of X must state precisely what it is to be X. But when X includes an accidental predicate, the composite does not designate an individual being. Thus, white man does not define a single being, for only primary beings have such individuality. Isn't that interesting? Aristotle uses the example white man, and what he's saying is that the way we identify objects do not describe their being. We call somebody a white man, yet that's not really who they are. Sure, the person is white, the person is a man, but that's not what they actually are. Let's roll with this idea. We continue. Consequently, what it is to be belongs only to those things whose being can be stated in a definition. And we do not have a definition whenever we have a term which identifies something. For then all terms will be definitions, since there is some term or other that identifies anything, but only when the term refers to something primary, and those terms refer to primary beings which attribute nothing to some other being. So what's going on here? Aristotle is saying not every individual can be defined completely using identifiers, because essentially identifiers are too general. They describe categories, but they don't go as far as to describe an actual individual. In truth, we use these terms neither in an equivocal nor in the same sense, but as medical, may refer to a single object by various relations which are neither identical nor ambiguous. Thus, a patient, an operation, and a surgical instrument are all called medical, not equivocally or to denote a single object, but because all have some relation to other or other to a common point of reference. However, it makes no difference exactly how we describe these facts, since it is evident that definition and what it was to be belong primarily and simply to primary beings only. They belong, though not primarily, to other considerations as well. If we agree on this, it does not follow necessarily that there must be a definition for every term that denotes an object, but only that a definition indicates a particular kind of object. It defines anything that is a unity, not by continuity, nor by connection, but in one of the principal ways in which a thing is one. What I have in mind is that one like being implies primarily a this something, but may refer to a quantity or quality. Hence, there is a concept, as well as a definition, even of white man, but not in the same way as there is either of the white or of a primary being. Oftentimes we use categories or labels or identifiers to try and describe somebody, right? We do this all the time. But when you do that, you're not really describing an actual person. What you're doing is you're describing a concept or a generalization. You're not really getting at the actual being of that something, particular thing that you're describing. Here's another example. My channel is called The Black Ponder, right? That's simply a concept, right? African American thinker. It's a concept. It doesn't really describe me, truly, right? Neil Trotter, what am I really? A black ponderer? No, that's just a concept. It's an idea, it's an identifier, but it doesn't really get to the heart of describing what I, Neil Trotter, actually am. And I use my name, but even that doesn't really do it, right? Although some features of objects are not their primary being, those that are primary being are natural and are established by nature. Hence, the nature of a thing is clearly its primary being, and it is not an element, but a principle. An element, on the other hand, is that into which something is divided and what inheres in it as material. For example, A and B are elements of the syllable. So what actually is somebody? What is an actual thing? Well, Aristotle is talking about what a thing actually is. Its primary being is what it is naturally. Once you start talking about its natural self, then you start talking about a definitive explanation of what something actually is. But what something is not an element, like white man, black ponder, right? These are just elements of somebody. I am a ponderer, right? I am black, right? These are elements of who I am, but that doesn't describe in the primary sense what I actually am. Those are just elements. So let's not get it twisted. Let's not make the mistake. What is cannot be defined, since a definition is merely talk and tells only of what kind a thing is. For example, they thought it impossible to tell what silver itself is, but merely that it is like tin. Hence, the only kind of primary being of which there may be definition and explanation is the composite, whether it be perceptible or intelligible. But of their primary constituents, there can be none, since a definition relates something to something, referring partly to the material and partly to form. Our language is often limited, right? Because when we describe something, what we're only doing is actually we're just comparing something. We're using relation to describe something. That's what we do almost all the time, right? Aristotle uses the example silver as it relates to tin. Well, silver's like tin, but silver's, more higher end, right? It's more expensive because it's more rare, right? It can be a little bit prettier, right? The thing is, silver's definition relies on tin because we're comparing tin to silver, and that's how we come up with this definition of silver. We do that all the time, right? Definitions that we create depend on other definitions. And what happens is that we're living in this world of just constantly comparing things with each other, and we're not really describing something as it actually is, right? Its actual being, its primary being, its individual self. Rather, we're just constantly comparing things to themselves, and we're using that as a way to describe things. And you can fall into a trap doing that. What kind of trap? Well, let's keep going. Here's another quote. We should recall the distinction between things' definition and its matter. Contrarieties which are in the definition mark a difference as to species, but those which are in the individualized matter do not. Hence, white or black does not divide men into species. White men are not a different species from black men, even if each class were denoted by a single word. For in this case, men are being taken as matter, and the matter does not make the difference, since color does not make different kinds of men. The flesh and the bones of which this and that man consists are different, to be sure, and any concrete individual is indeed distinct, but not therefore of another species, because there is no contrariety in definition, and whatever can be defined without contrariety is ultimately indivisible. But Callias is just like a very important figure in ancient Greece. He's like a popular statesman or something like that. So Aristotle uses this example, Callias. But Callias implies definition together with matter, and so does the white man, because it is Callias who is white, whereas man is white only incidentally. Similarly, a ring of bronze and one of wood do not differ as to species, but between a triangle of bronze and a ring of wood, there is a contrariety in the definition, not merely in matter. Man, I just find that very fascinating. This was written in the 4th century BC, right? And yet, today, we still struggle with that 2015 AD. I said this before in previous videos, and I'll say it again. Heck, Aristotle said it. We have a white man over there, we have a black man over there. Two fundamentally different people, right? That's what we think in this society. Oh, those two people are fundamentally different. They could be. I mean, that is a possibility. But is it because that man is white and that black man is black? No! They could be not fundamentally different at all. They could be very similar. Each of them is an individual, right? And they're different in individual ways. But we describe this person as white, this person is black. Then we start coming up with these definitions of what somebody is, and they're false. And Aristotle uses this example with a ring, right? A ring of wood and a ring of bronze. They're two rings, right? One is just made of wood, one is made of bronze. They're just composed of different elements, but they're still two rings. They're not different in that regard. It's not like one is a triangle and one is a ring, as Aristotle said. Now, I'm not saying elements don't matter or that elements aren't useful when you use the element as an identifier. When we say white man, black man, for example, I'm black, African American. That's true. Am I a proud black man? Yes. Can you extrapolate some meaning from that? Certainly. Does that really describe on a primary level, on an individual level, what I actually am? No. But we do that all the time, don't we? It's not just race, it's all types of other things. For example, like a big buff dude, right? Like, oh, that guy's big and buff, right? Very muscular, tall. So, I mean, he must be a hard, stoic, tough dude. But he could be like a crybaby, very emotional, love watching movies on the Lifetime network. For those that don't know, that's a cable television network in America that shows very emotional movies primarily targeted to women, right? No. I'm a strong, independent woman, right? You hear that a lot. Cool. You're strong, you're independent, and you're a woman. But other than that, I don't know jack squat about you. I want to get to know you a little better. But we hear that, we're like, we know, okay, I know what this person's all about, right? No, you do not. You don't know anything about this person, really. This is an excellent work, extremely relevant today. It's known as one of the greatest philosophical works of all time, and there's all types of other things discussed here, but I wanted to talk to you about that. The metaphysical idea that what something primarily is not identifiers or descriptors or elements something is composed of. People are deeper than that. things are deeper than that, actually. Just be aware of the difference between an element and a principle in regards to what something actually is. Something is composed of elements, but those elements don't necessarily define the principle of what something is, what something naturally is. One big takeaway from the metaphysics is understanding the difference between the two and creating sound logic and reasoning based off of these differences. Not making false conclusions, creating definitions for something or someone that are false. Looking at the elements something is composed of and saying, oh, you're this. No, you're not that. Those are various aspects of you, but that's not what you really are. Check it out, the metaphysics. I would recommend this if you're a beginner in philosophy and you're ready to step up to the intermediate level. You're ready to start getting deep into philosophy. Well, it's time to get into metaphysics. It's not that difficult, but there are some very profound ideas that you kind of have to wrestle with and you kind of have to think critically about. I would recommend it, of course. I mean, most people in philosophy would, right? You've been watching The Black Ponder. I want to thank you for watching and tune in next time for more philosophical thought.